The First World War was over and Hitler was furious. According to him, the Jews were to blame. He later went into politics and we all know what followed. The question remains, how exactly did Hitler become a Nazi? Watch this video till the end, because by the end I will explain a revelation that might shock you. Hitler had worked for... Hey, welcome back to History Hustle. If this is your first time, I'm Stefan, history teacher, hustling history for you. And the only thing you have to do is make sure to subscribe and also hit the notification bell to join the hustle. Let's start. Last video I explained about Hitler during the First World War. We mostly know what Hitler did during the Great War. We do not exactly know how Hitler's thoughts developed during the war. See, during the time Hitler was not an overt writer, and second-hand testimonies have been colored by the turbulent times of the 1920s, 30s and 40s. Now, it is commonly believed that the war made Hitler an anti-Semite and thus a National Socialist. However, historian Thomas Weber, who wrote Hitler's First War, disputes this thesis. So, let's find out. After hearing the news of the Armistice, Hitler was mentally crushed. He wrote in his book Mein Kampf, "For my part, I then decided that I would take up the political work." Now let me be clear here, Mein Kampf is in no way a reliable source. However, it is reliable when we want to have a peek in the mind of a National Socialist in the first half of the 1920s. On the 17th of November, Adolf Hitler was discharged from the hospital in Pasewalk. He now found himself in a new Germany. 1 week prior, Philipp Scheidemann had proclaimed the German Republic. The German Kaiser Wilhelm II had fled to the Netherlands, where he would remain in exile till his death in 1941. Hitler traveled from Berlin to Munich. Now, note here that Hitler had basically nothing to go back to. He had no family, no friends, no job, and no life. His only life was the army, and since the List Regiment originated from Munich, that's the main reason he went there. Now note here that by the time he got in Munich, his comrades from the List Regiment were still located in Belgium, and they would make their way to Munich mid-December. The end of the war did not mean the end of Hitler's military career, because 2 weeks after his arrival in Munich, he was sent to guard a POW camp near the Austrian border. And when that camp was cleared, he came back to Munich in February 1919. Thomas Weber, he wrote that there is no proof that the members of the List Regiment have been politically radicalized because of the First World War. Because when, for example, after the war, recruiting began for volunteers to protect the German eastern borders against Bolshevik upheaval, only very few signed up. And during the January 1919 election, most of them voted for pro-Republican parties. They didn't support the extreme left or the extreme right. Now obviously the List Regiment does not equal Hitler. Now let's take a look at the extremist movements after the Armistice. Okay. In January 1919, communist insurgents made their move in Berlin. They were led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht. Now this so-called Spartakist Uprising was crushed by the Freikorps. The Freikorps were bands of soldiers that refused to be demobilized and basically acted upon their own political agenda, which was mostly conservative to far right wing. Now they did not only help crushing communist activities in Berlin, also in other parts of the country, because communists made their move in the Ruhr and in Munich, the city Hitler was in at the moment. Now Bavaria was already proclaimed from a monarchy state into a socialist people's state of Bavaria by Kurt Eisner within the Weimar Republic. Now Kurt Eisner was assassinated on the 21st of February by a right-wing nationalist. This created chaos. And hardline communists, they made use of this and they proclaimed the Bavarian Soviet Republic. Now shortly after, the Weimar Republic, they made a call for people to serve in militias to take down the Soviet Republic. And many people responded to this. Why, you might ask? Well, people are much more willing to defend heart and home than, for example, a far eastern semi-German area in the Baltic. Now note here that this call was made by the Weimar Republic, a democratic government, yet another proof that the members of the List regiment were not radicalized because of the war. And eventually, with the help of these right-wing Freikorps, the Bavarian Soviet Republic was taken down. Now, this resulted into a Red Scare, fear of communism, which made the Bavarian people blind for the possible threats of extreme right-wing nationalism. And because many of the leading figures of the Bavarian Soviet Republic happened to be Jewish, did fed into the conspiracy theory of Judeo-Bolshevism, the idea that communism and Jewry were intertwined, which also gave way for anti-Semitism. And before people start commenting, yes, Jewish people did volunteer to take part in the militia to take down the Bavarian Soviet Republic. Now, in Mein Kampf, Hitler writes about this period. The only thing is, it's not about him. Where was Hitler during this time? Was he in Munich? Well, he sure was. The following might shock you. He was working for the socialists. See, after he returned to Munich, he took part in a soldiers' council. He's even seen on the funeral procession of Kurt Eisner. And after the Bavarian Soviet Republic was proclaimed, he was chosen as a representative of his battalion. His job was to maintain relationships with the propaganda department of the socialist government. Now I know, this raises more questions than it answers. Why, if Hitler's thoughts were shaped by the war, would he take part into a socialist government? It doesn't make any sense, and that is perhaps the answer you're looking for. Hitler himself did not make any sense short after the First World War. He was totally confused. He was under influence by all these different political movements, just like Germany itself was at the time. He sure was a nationalist, which Kurt Eisner managed to combine with socialism. But when after that the Bavarian Soviet Republic was proclaimed, which was obviously like less nationalist and more socialist, he most likely preferred to stay with his comrades and have a sense of belonging than to jump off the bandwagon. In other words, when Hitler returned to Munich at the end of 1918, his future was wide open. It could have gone any way, but eventually it did took the route of anti-Semitism and National Socialism. If we believe Mein Kampf, Hitler was already an anti-Semite during the war. This is what he wrote about when he was on leave in Munich 1916. Government offices were staffed by Jews. Almost every clerk was a Jew, and every Jew was a clerk. Like leeches, they were slowly sucking the blood from the pores of the national body. Actually, there's no evidence that Hitler nor the soldiers of the List regiment were anti-Semitic during the war. In fact, it was a Jewish officer named Hugo Gutmann that suggested Hitler to be decorated, as I explained in the previous episode. So this at least shows that Hitler was not openly anti-Semitic, if he was at all. And although anti-Semitism existed by the time, it was by far not as extreme as it would develop in later years. And actually this might surprise you, but up until the end of the First World War, it was actually very unlikely that it would be Germany that was the country that transformed itself into the pinnacle of anti-Semitism. Now, the concept of anti-Semitism is very broad, so if you'd like to see an episode about this, let me know in a comment down below. After the fall of the Bavarian Soviet Republic, Hitler chose the side of the opponent, the new Bavarian government. Now, in a more moderate environment, his political thoughts now had a chance to calm down. He was tasked by observing small political parties that might form a threat for the Weimar Republic. And one of these parties was the German Workers' Party. When he attended one of the lectures of the German Workers' Party, Hitler found a new home. It was there his political views were shaped. He soon rose through the ranks, and eventually the party was renamed the National Socialist German Workers' Party. And when in 1923 the German economy was shattered, this party made a coup attempt. Hitler was now a true man of action, a true National Socialist, and a true anti-Semite. If you want to know more about an earlier right-wing coup attempt, you can check out the video that I made about the Kapp Putsch of 1920, which I shot on location in Berlin. If you like this content, check me out on Patreon, because with your donations I can keep doing this. Thank you so much for watching. Do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.